Hey, hi. The show has started. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, in whatever time zone, whatever version of the multiverse you are in. I hope you are having a good day. My name is Maria Wich-Vila. I'm a 2005 graduate of Harvard Business School, and I am the founder of ApplicantLab.com. And I'm super excited to be here today to talk to you about how to prepare for your business school interviews. So, what are we going to cover today? First of all, I'm going to take a step back as I am off. I like to do if you this is not your first rodeo with Maria on a webinar, you know that I like to take a step back and think about like, okay, let's look at the big picture here. What are they looking for in the interviews anyway? Like why do they even do these things, right? Like it's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort. And then I'm going to give some preparation tips. And by the way, spoiler alert, one of my biggest preparation tips is don't prepare too much. What? Counterintuitive, right? I know. I'm going to explain why. And then if you're like, oh gosh, I have to go. I was cooking something and it's on fire. And I have to, if there's one thing you take away from this time with me right now is the best way to prepare for your interview for business school is to have lots of stories ready from your past, right? Stuff that your stories that you can then reallocate those stories or adapt them to use them and have them ready to go to answer multiple different types of interview questions. So think of if you have an experience, here's like the spoiler alert. I'm going to summarize like the entire 1 hour presentation right now. If you've had like a certain leadership experience, let's say, think about all the different facets of that experience. And then that experience could then become almost like a Swiss Army knife that you can pull out the different pieces of it depending on which specific question you're given in the interview. If you prepare that way, a lot of people do it the other way around. A lot of people, and this is not the right way to do it, they think about, okay, what's the question I might get? And therefore, let me think about what the answer is that I'm going to give. That's not necessarily as efficient as thinking first, what are some answers I could give? What are some stories I could tell about myself? And then how could I adapt those different stories? So if I get asked an ethical dilemma question, or if I get asked a difficult teammate question, or if I get asked a persuading a difficult person, like I can sort of pull out the different pieces of my Swiss Army knife story and use it to answer different questions. That is a lot more efficient. That's a much more efficient way of preparing. Then finally, sort of on the back half of what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to sort of go through the major question types. I'm going to give you some do's and don'ts. Obviously, we've only got an hour. If interview preparation for your MBA interview, if all of it could be covered in only an hour, um, then I don't know. It's not. It's going to take more than an hour. But basically, my goal here, as I was sitting down and I was thinking about doing this, I was like, okay, how am I going to give people the most bang for the buck in the time that I've got? So let's get started. What are some things that they're looking for in the interviews anyway? So let's look at that. First of all, the ability for the interviewee to speak English. Now you might think like, oh, ha ha ha, Maria, very funny. Like she's kicking things off with a joke. I'm not really joking. I have to tell you, in the years that I've been doing this, I have gotten essays, resumes from people, and I read it and it's in flawless English and it's wonderful. And then I get them on Zoom and they cannot speak. This is a problem. Because if you are going to, and of course, when I say ability to speak English, I'm assuming that this program that you're applying to is conducted in English. If it's conducted in French or whatever, then obviously, but the ability to speak the language that the school is conducted in. This is important because if you're going to go to that school, first of all, they want you to succeed academically. They want you to be able to communicate with your classmates, and they want you to be able to get a job. And sometimes people really have very low levels of spoken English. Their written English is excellent. They can write very well, they can read perfectly, but when they speak, wow, it's really hard to understand them. And that is something that is, and you would think like that's not very fair. That it can be a deal breaker because even if somebody is brilliant and smart, if I think to myself, okay, if I'm going to put this person in front of a McKinsey recruiter and they're going to flop because the recruiter is just simply with the best of intentions but is unable to understand what they say, then yikes, that's a big failure for everyone, right? Everyone has just wasted their time. Moving on in terms of ability to speak, can you speak like a human? Do you have personality? Are you someone that is likable? Are you like a real person and not some sort of fake, off-putting, are you someone that I like? Are you someone that I want to hang out with? Are you someone, there's when we talk about corporate recruiting, there's sort of like the common recruiting idea of like, oh, would I want to spend 3 hours in an airport with this person if we were on a flight that got delayed? It's similar for business school. Like, would I want to be on a project team with this person if we had to do a group project? Or would I want to sit next to this person in class for a semester? That sort of personality thing. And if you're wondering, like, well, why does personality matter so much? I keep moving ahead to the next one, and then I'm like, no, wait, I'm actually not done. Why does personality matter so much? Well, if you think back, I have another presentation that I do called the hierarchy of needs. It is on the GMAT Club YouTube channel. Basically, simply being intelligent, the quick version of this of that idea is that simply being smart isn't good enough, because smartness alone does not get you anywhere in the business world, where you need to work with people and you need to convince people to do things with and for you. The ability to speak professionally. Can you focus on what's important, or do you just ramble and ramble and ramble? And is this person actually a leader? Is this someone who actually lives the values of our school and our community? So how do people totally blow it because of these things? Well, first of all, when you're preparing for your application, some people get so obsessed with like, I have to memorize the 55 million rules for the GMAT sentence correction, whatever, which I get it, you do. Or they're like, oh my God, I need to review my essay. I'm on version 372 of my essay, and I've run it through every single online grammar checker, and my written application is flawless. And the problem is, that's great. That might get you to the interview, but if you get to the interview and then your spoken English is terrible, game over. How do people blow it when they don't actually speak like a human? This sort of runs the gamut of like, some people are either like insanely arrogant, like, look at me, I am so smart and I am so brilliant. Like, you are so lucky that you are getting a chance to interview me. I think some people do that because I think they actually are that arrogant, which if you are, you need to pretend that you're not. And I think other people aren't actually that arrogant, but they think that in order to impress the person, I have to impress. It's my business school interview. I must impress them. Ergo, I must radiate a certain level of competence. And like, no, don't do it. And then also on the other side, people get painfully nervous. I can't. I've done interviews with people where I love the story on paper, the essays are great, and I get them on Zoom, and they're like, "Hi, yeah, hi, how's it? Oh yeah, hi, Hinton. Oh yeah, so I work at PayPal, and yeah, right." And you're like, "Oh my God," and I get it, right? It's a high stakes. I'm not going to pretend that the interview's super important. It's a high stakes conversation, but it's also not like the last high stakes conversation you're ever going to have. And so if you show up and you're like, "Oh God, I can't even handle the pressure of anything," and I'm just gonna like, bad news. Um, Another way that people don't sound like humans in their interviews is they try to memorize their answers as if though this were a Shakespearean play and you were giving a monologue from Hamlet. No, don't do that. I'm going to jump into this a little bit more in a second, but don't memorize your answers. That is terrible. And so how do people blow it in terms of not being able to speak professionally? They literally throw spaghetti at a wall. So if I say to you in the interview something like, okay, tell me about a time that you led a team, someone will say, okay, when I was part of leading that team, I did 45 things. So I'm going to mention all 45 of those things, even though some of them might not be like, maybe thing number 37 is going to be the thing that connects with them. Right. And they're going to say, oh, thing 37, like everything else was kind of lame, but 37, like that's the problem is that by telling too many details, the key things get lost. And you are overwhelming my brain and my cognitive reserve, my cognitive energy. If you overwhelm my brain with 40 different irrelevant pieces of information, I'm not going to have the mental energy necessary to focus on what are the 5 or 4. I said 5 out loud and then I did this. What are the 5 or 4 key pieces of information that I actually need to know? So you do need to prepare, by the way. I'm just saying don't over prepare so that you don't memorize, so that you are memorizing things. Okay. So how do people blow it when I want to know, is this person for real? First of all, sometimes people exaggerate on their resume. And so the resume might say something like, I led a team of 20 to launch a new product. And I'll say, oh my God, tell me about this. Where was the team distributed? Were they all over the world? Were they just, okay, they were just in your, okay. So then how was that? How did that, like, were there a lot of politics involved with that? And then it's really easy. It only takes a couple of questions from a skilled interviewer to figure out if you were telling the truth or not, right? Because if you really did lead that team, and I say to you, like, oh, so what were some of like the political, like, were there like political, was there infighting, or what? You're going to be like, oh yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. As with every big group project, right? There's always going to be people with different opinions. And so here's how I managed it. If you didn't actually manage that project, if you were like one of those 20 people, and maybe you like, or, you sent out the agenda for one of the meetings, but you didn't really lead it, it's going to be really obvious really quick. Because I'm going to ask, like, how did you handle this team dynamic or this project dynamic? Excuse me. And you're going to be like, I didn't. So that's a problem. Another big one for leadership, and here I'm going to zoom in on something very specific. There's a lot of tendency for people to talk about we, right? Because in the business world, we tend to do things in groups. And so when we are talking about an accomplishment or a challenge that we face, we talk about So we decided that we were going to go to the client and we were going to propose using this ERP system, and we told them that it would take 6 weeks. The problem is that we are not applying to business school. The problem is that you are applying to business school. And so if you give me an answer where I ask you about something that you did, and I am trying to get is this person actually a leader, right? If we look over here, like, that's what I want to find out. Is this person actually a leader? So if I ask you a question about some sort of leadership experience and you talk about we all the way home, the coffee has not kicked in yet, guys. You're going to have to put up with the lameness until until it does. If you talk about we, I can't tell what you did. So when you're thinking about these stories, if you were in a group, which is common, think about what did you do within the group. So you might say, well, so we went to the client to pitch them this new ERP system. I was in charge of figuring out how to socialize this idea in advance to their executives so that when we came to the meeting, they would be open to the idea. So what I did was, before the meeting, I talked to all of it. So make sure that it's clear what you did, because you're the one applying. I've asked people multiple follow-up questions, and I still walk away. I will spend like 7 minutes, right? I'll ask like a main interview question, and then I don't get what I'm looking for from that first answer. So then I ask kind of like a more probing follow-up question. I still don't get what I'm looking for. And eventually I'm just like, you know what, forget it. I know what you did as a team. I don't know what you did as a person. And so I just spent several minutes of this interview, and I have no idea if you're actually a good leader. Another one, in terms of moving more to this, is this person for real in terms of, do they really live our values? You need to know what a school's culture is. Spoiler alert, most business schools say that their cultures are very supportive and very collaborative. Even if they're really not, they all say that. So just off the bat, if you're scrambling for something, just highlight how supportive you are, how collaborative you are, how nice you are, how kind and empathetic you are. And most schools have that as their core value. And then the other one is sort of no self-reflection or no maturity. So, and we're going to get into this one in a minute, but like, if somebody is like, yeah, I completely saved the world, and thanks to me, the internet exists, you're welcome. That might be true, and you might have done that, but the problem is that you're not living the value of sort of teamwork and humility that a lot of schools like to see. And at the end of the day, what are all of these questions trying to get at? If I let this person into my school, I work in admissions. It's my job to let people in. If I let someone in and they attend class, is the professor going to come to me and say, why did you let this person in? They don't speak English, right? Is the professor going to complain and say, and when we talk about the hierarchy of needs, thinking further down the hierarchy, when we talk about like analytical skill, right? Why did you let this person in? They have no idea. They can't even add 2 numbers together. They are failing my class because you let someone in, admissions officer, who cannot handle the work. Oh my God, I'm going to kill you. Right? The professors are already tenured, so they can say whatever they want, right? They're not going to lose their jobs. Same thing with corporate recruiters, right? Every school brings recruiters to campus, and they have the whole wine and cheese, get to know you thing. I mean, maybe in COVID they didn't, but hopefully that'll start coming back soon. And if I put this person down in front of a recruiter, and the recruiter's like, hello, why would you like to work at Goldman Sachs? and the person like can't the person's like, "Well, when I was 3, I found a penny on the sidewalk, and ever since then, I've been interested in money." Like, "Oh, yikes, that's embarrassing." And similarly with current students, are they gonna like you? And then alumni, um, I'll tell you, like, as a graduate of Harvard Business School, I sometimes meet other graduates of Harvard Business School, and I am embarrassed that they went to my school. Whether I don't think they're frankly very bright, that one doesn't happen as often, or they're just like kind of like horrible people, like whatever it is. And then like, as an alumnus, you sort of feel like, oh, what are they doing there at admissions? Like, why are they letting these people in? So what can you do to avoid this being you? If English is not your native language, um, I want you to watch TV. And my kid has just left for school a few minutes ago. I think he left. He can't believe, like, don't tell him that I gave anyone ever the advice ever to watch TV, because I'm constantly telling him, like, stop watching TV. Watch TV. It doesn't have to be, I mean, it could be something like, business news, like Bloomberg TV, or in the US, CNBC, is it? Right, CNBC. It could be business news, definitely. And that, by the way, this doesn't have to be live TV. It could be on YouTube, or even if it's just sitcoms, so that you start to learn. And honestly, like my mother was a foreign language teacher. My mother was a Spanish teacher. And she would tell people sometimes, just like watch the TV, and now we can pause. It's so nice. And like literally, if you depending on how bad, if you really need help with your spoken English, like pause and like repeat what the character just said. So it's like, Ross, Rachel wants to know where your pet monkey is. Like, then you pause. Ross, Rachel wants to know where your pet monkey is. Like, whatever it is, start doing it. Um, Even if it means that there are other things. Like, let me tell you this. If you show up with the perfect quote unquote interview answer, but I can't quite understand you, I'd rather have someone who is more fluent in terms of verbal speech, and maybe their answer's a little unpolished, but I'd rather have that latter one. And speaking of being a little bit unpolished, it's okay if you're a little bit unpolished. The interviewer, the person interviewing you, is a real person. And for the most part, not always, but for the most part, most people who work as admissions interviewers are nice people. They're either alumni volunteers who do it because they love their alma mater, or they are paid admissions staff. But at the end of the day, they're real people. A lot of them got MBAs also. So a lot of them were in your shoes 10, 15, 25 years ago, whatever it is. So don't think to yourself, I think sometimes people psych themselves out because they imagine that it's like some sort of, I'm speaking to the admissions officer, and they are like some judge on high who is, keeping a mental note of every, did I say, like, oh no, I said two, uhs, and I shouldn't have said, because, it makes me sound like, I'm pausing, and like, and then, oh, forget it. If you go into it with that mentality, you're going to freak yourself out, and then you're going to not do well. So at the very minimum, think to yourself, it's Maria. It's someone like Maria. Imagine that I, as a real person, am interviewing you. And when you think about the fact that they're a real person, hopefully that helps alleviate some of the pressure you put on yourself. And one way to get ready for this is try to have conversations with people you don't know that well. And it could be a mock interview, like, let me call my friend and do practice MBA, but it could just be talk about anything. Just practice and the reason this is such a weird, but I think it's a relevant tip in this day and age, is because after COVID, we've all been kind of on Zooms, and I just think the art of conversation, and also with all the text messaging that you kids do today with the LOLs and the WTF, like I think that the art of conversation has started to be lost. And so then when you get into a high stakes conversation, you're not used to having conversations in general, much less a high stakes conversation. And I think that that is damaging people's performance. Um, in order to focus on the vital stuff, put yourself in their shoes and think about what it is you do want to convey. This is the part you will prepare, right? So when you're thinking about your story and you've got the 45 different things you did, don't talk about all 45 things. Think in advance. What are the 4 or 5 most vital things I need to convey to them? And then get ready with those pieces. That is what you are going to prepare. In terms of like, is this person for real? First of all, obviously don't lie in your application if you're watching this prior to submitting. And then to address the sort of we-I dichotomy, think back, like, what did I do? Because sometimes you forget. Sometimes you're talking about something that happened 2-3 years ago and you don't even remember actually. So actually stop before you go into the interview and think, what did I do? How did I push things forward? Another way to sometimes because sometimes it can be hard when we think about ourselves and say like, well, what was my contribution? Here's another thought exercise that I give people. Ask yourself, if I hadn't been there, how would things have been different? So maybe if I say to you like, well, okay, so what's one of your strengths? And you're like, I don't know. But if I say, okay, if you were not in this project, let's say instead of you, it had been Julia on your team, or let's say it had been Wayne on your team. Instead, they still would have gotten it done, but how would they have done it differently? Or would they have done it less well? Right. And then you're like, oh, well, compared to somebody else, if somebody else had been doing it, yeah, that is how I did it, or that is what I contributed. And then whenever possible, focus on the EQ, emotional quotient aspects of your answer, less also on technical things. So in terms of preparation, yes, you got to know your stuff. You need to know your stuff. You can't just show up it's a blind interview and I've got your resume and I'm like, oh, so tell me about like in your first job 6 years ago, you did this thing. Like, what was that like? And you're like, oh, I don't remember. Not great. So make sure that you review for the blind interviews that you have gone through every line in your resume and you've at least jogged your memory on like, what did I do? What were the challenges involved? How did I help move things forward? However, I do not want you to over prepare. Okay. And what do I mean by that? What are like the biggest mistakes people make when they're over preparing? Memorizing answers, thinking that it is a Shakespearean soliloquy. It is not. And then trying to think of any and all possible question type in the universe. I alluded to this earlier. So why is over preparing bad? Because if you try to memorize your answers like word for word, you're going to end up sounding like a robot. And I don't mean like a cool, fun robot that's like, ooh, let me use artificial intelligence to give you the best cocktail recipe. Like, no. I mean like a sad robot. And when you sound like a robot in your answers, it sort of breaks. There is this sort of, there are a few things in the admissions process that are kind of fake. They're sort of unspoken fake things. And one of them is that even though you're supposed to prepare for your interview, the idea is that ideally we're trying to get to know the real you. And so ideally, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you when you had 2 weeks to prepare. Ideally, I would have like bumped into you on the street and been like, hey, how's it going? Why do you want to come to my MBA program? Right? Because the whole point is I'm trying to get a sense of who the real you is. Because even if you memorize all your answers for this interview, there's no way you're going to be able to memorize everything you say in my classroom, everything you say in every club meeting, in every project, right? So there's this sort of unspoken covenant, in the interview. The idea is that I'm trying to get to know you as a person. I am not trying to get to know if you are good at memorizing things, right? You're not, the contest in question is not, is this person, if I needed to replace the voice recording, the voice memo app on my phone, could I replace it with this person? And it sounds really, really fake. So it's really easy to tell when someone has memorized an answer. A couple of different ways. First of all, when the sentences flow together very quickly. And for example, if I am telling you a story and I think, my son has a cross-country meet today. He is going to do this, right? When we are naturally speaking to other people, there's a slight pause between what you're saying. If you've memorized an answer, you're like, a time that I was a leader was when I was in charge of doing a project at my consulting company. And then what we did is and then the client said this, and then I said this, and then blah, 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 blah. Like, whoo, baby. There's no pause. And it's really easy to tell when someone has memorized it. Now, you might not realize that it's easy to tell, but it is. And so it seems really fake, really artificial. And the problem is that if I think to myself, well, okay, how do I know if this person was clearly expecting this question, and so they're ready with this question, then you're begging them to ask a follow-up question. Because I want to see, can you think on your feet? Are you like a real person? Is there a brain back there, or is there just a voice memo recording app? And where these things really go off the rails is it is very easy to throw someone for a loop with a variation on a question. So if I get the sense that someone has memorized their answers, instead of asking, what's your greatest accomplishment, right? Which is sort of like a canned standard question. And then, because if I know I'm just going to get let me tell you about my greatest accomplishment. My greatest accomplishment was when I did blah, blah, blah. I'll say something like, what was your second greatest accomplishment? Or What's an accomplishment that other people are proud of that you're not so proud of, right? I will try to think of a variation that you're not ready for. And the problem is, and this happens a lot with me. I mean, sometimes when I give HBS mock interviews, I literally cut people off because they start sprinting in the wrong direction. And I'm like, "Was that the question I asked?" No, that was not the question I asked. I did not ask, "What makes you a great leader?" I asked something slightly different. And so when you memorize a bunch of answers, the problem is that you are so pumped and ready to go, and the adrenaline, remember, your adrenaline is gonna be through the roof. That's a natural human reaction. And so you're gonna wanna cling to the certainty of your memorized answer. So if you get a variation on the question, like, "What do you think is your 3rd greatest accomplishment?" You're gonna start off and you're gonna be like, and I'm gonna be like, "No." And in fact, for HBS interviews, I have actually I've been like, "I'm sorry, you're not answering the question I asked. I asked a different question. Please answer the question that I asked, which was X." So that's the problem with memorizing. And then once you memorize it and you can tell that the person is reacting poorly to you, you will be rattled. And then you're gonna go into a spiral of like, "Oh God, I messed it up. They can tell that I'm they can, and then that just begin then that's hard to recover from. Then you really need to slam on the brakes and control your emotions. And that can be hard for anyone to recover from. And so part of the reason this happens is that one of the biggest, sort of side or associated sins with this is that people are like, okay, Maria, like I signed up for ApplicantLab and I've got the interview prep module and I wanted to have every single question. Like I found a question bank. Oh, applicants love a good question bank, don't they? Applicants love to see the list of the 7,000 million possible questions. You might get 45 million questions, and I love seeing all of them because that way I can prepare for each and every one. The problem is that for all of these billion permutations out there, you try to prep for every single one. First of all, the amount of mental bandwidth you're going to use, your mental RAM is going to be full to bursting. And then what if instead of variation number 4,000,003, I ask you variation number 4,000,004? You're gonna look like a deer in headlights. The people who memorize and who try to have every answer ready for everything, they look like it doesn't feel like a conversation. They feel like a fake mannequin or like a dummy. So, what's the solution, Maria? You've been telling me all the things that are problematic with this. So what are the solution is buckets. One bucket can paint multiple pictures. Just like, for example, let's say that you are thinking about your experiences and you think about a time like, okay, I've got a story where I convinced someone of something, right? It was a VP who was above me. They wanted to do something one way. I convinced them to do it another way. If you think about that story and the details of that story, you can Swiss Army knife that story. So you can take that story from that bucket and you can use it to paint a picture that answers the question, can you give me an example of your teamwork skills? Or that answers the question of, tell me about a time you worked with a difficult person, right? Because if you're persuading someone of something, even if they're like kind of nice, a nice person, maybe they were difficult in this situation where you were like, hey, boss, we shouldn't do this. And they were like, yeah, 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 you don't know what you're talking about. Get out of my office. Like persuading someone can help you answer the question, tell me about time you worked with a difficult person. A story where you convince someone can answer the question, what was your greatest accomplishment? Because spoiler alert, your greatest accomplishment for business school interview should not be the greatest accomplishment in terms of numbers only. It should be your greatest accomplishment where you showed leadership personality traits. So your greatest accomplishment might not even have happened at work. You might have the resume accomplishment that's like, I launched the thing and it made $3 zillion and my company gave me Best Employee of the Universe award. But if you didn't have to really work with other people or convince other people or motivate other people, you just did it like by yourself, it's actually not a great answer for business school, given that they are looking for people who can work with others and motivate others and convince others, right? So a story where you convince someone might actually make a really good answer to the greatest accomplishments. A story where you convince someone is also great for answering the question, describe your leadership style. Well, what's my leadership style? Well, here's how when I'm working with people and we're not agreeing on the path forward, here's what I do. So you're going to want to have multiple buckets to get ready for your interview. One is the My Future bucket. This bucket is different from all of the other buckets. How is this bucket different from other buckets? This bucket is the pragmatic part of the interview. This is like, where do I want to go with my career? Why does the MBA make sense? And then why does this make sense given where I have been in the past? the leadership bucket, the empathy bucket, and the maturity bucket. These are not all of the possible buckets out there, but I was just trying to think of like what are the main biggest ones. So the sorts of questions you might get that are talking about your future. Walk me through your resume. What are your short-term career goals? What are your long-term career goals? What type of internship do you want to get? Where do you want to work after business school? What do you want to do in the long term? What's the difference you want to make in the world? Why do you need an MBA? Why do you need an MBA from our school? What is it about our school that you like, et cetera, et cetera? Now, right now you might be thinking, well, walk me through my resume. Maria, that's not a future question. That's a past question. But as we're going to get to in a minute, what you choose to talk about in your resume has to be tied to your future story. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Leadership. A story that fits into your leadership bucket can paint a picture, a question that's asked about accomplishments, a time you're asked about innovation, a time you're asked about persuasion, a time you're asked about all kinds of things. Empathy. Empathy is great for teamwork questions, a difficult person, conflict, like have you ever had a conflict with someone? Also, there's been an increasing trend towards asking questions around inclusivity. We're seeing it in essays. We're also seeing it in interviews, right? Sometimes it's explicit, and those irritate me, where it's like, can you tell us about a time you fostered a diverse environment? I don't really like that one, and I hope not that any adcoms are watching this, but if they are, don't ask that question. But a question like, hey, we're really about inclusivity here at UNC Flagler. Like, can you tell us about a time that you have fostered an inclusive environment? Being able to demonstrate empathy, a lot of inclusivity involves putting yourself in someone else's shoes and realizing that they are being excluded and then doing something about it. The maturity bucket. This is a bucket that can answer all kinds of stories, all kinds of questions. Tell us about a time you failed. What are your weaknesses? Here's a question that I have seen Berkeley ask sometimes that I love. What kinds of people annoy you? I love that. Good question, right? What are your favorite types of people to work with? Okay, great. When you have to work on a team with people, who don't you like working with? What types of people annoy you? This involves really knowing yourself and knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. So what you're going to do to get ready for your interview is you're going to start brainstorming all kinds of stories about your life. And then you're going to think about which bucket or buckets can they go in, right? So by the way, if you are an ApplicantLab user and you're watching this, I thank you for your business. You're going to want to revisit the brainstorming module, because in the brainstorming module, if you see down here, oh, what's this? It's buckets. So in the brainstorming module, I have you think about a bunch of different stories about yourself. I give you prompts to think about those stories, and you record those stories. And so how would this look in real life? You would think to yourself, okay, I've got this story. There was a project that I did once, and the client did not want to listen to our ideas. We had worked so hard to create these ideas. The client was like, get out of my face. Your ideas are stupid. Everyone was frustrated. My team was frustrated. The client was frustrated. And I helped make things better. Okay, so what buckets can this fall into? Leadership. The leadership aspect of it was I convinced the client to accept our proposal. The empathy aspect of this story was when, first of all, I realized that our client didn't trust us as consultants because we were outsiders. And the second part that empathy played was I thought, wow, my team seems really burnt out. I should probably ask if they can get an extra vacation day at the end of this project. And the maturity bucket might be something like, I was trying to pitch the marketing director. She clearly did not like me, but I had a feeling that she would really like Amanda on my team. So I sent Amanda in to have lunch with her. And then Amanda ran the meeting because I realized that for whatever reason, this woman did not like me, but she liked Amanda. So I had Amanda take over. So if we think about it, this one story can answer all of these following interview questions. Tell me about your greatest accomplishment. I convinced a difficult client and we sealed the deal and we saved the day. Persuasion example, obviously. I wasn't able to persuade her, but Amanda did. And we figured out that what really mattered to her, this VP of marketing, was that she really cared about saving money. And so that's what we tailored our presentation and we persuaded her. What's your leadership style? Multiple aspects of this story talk about leadership style, right? I'm the sort of leader who I help, if I have someone on my team that's doing really well, I give them the spotlight. I gave Amanda the spotlight. I lobby for my team and their needs. I got them extra time off, whatever it is. When have you worked with a difficult person? That's an obvious one. When have you overcome a challenge? Right? Well, the challenge was the difficult person. When have you demonstrated empathy beyond yourself? This could be I empathized with the client that they didn't trust us. We were a bunch of white collar 22-year-old college kids, and they were oil rig workers who had been doing this for 50 years, and they didn't, I got it. Like, they didn't want us to tell them what to do. It made sense, right? Or I realized that my team was about to quit, so I did X. When have I fostered an inclusive environment? This story could work, for example, in the made up example that I just gave. We were a bunch of white collar 22-year-old college graduates coming to tell these steel workers or these oil workers or these oil workers what to do. And so I realized that we probably looked like little twerpy snobs. And so in order to make them feel included, I made sure to talk to them about, like, oh yeah, my dad used to be a construction worker. And so, yeah, and yeah, like, what did you do to make these people, these clients, if they didn't trust you as outsiders, but you eventually won them over, how did you include them in the process or make them feel that they were part of the process? A failure or weakness. I tried to convince the marketing director at the client, and she did not listen to me. That was my failure. So how did I address it? I sent Amanda in instead. Or when did you have to change direction? Same thing, right? Have you ever been in a situation where you were working on a project and it didn't go the way and you suddenly had to change direction? Tell me about that. I had to change direction because I realized I wasn't getting through to them. So I sent Amanda in. So do you see how, let's just take a second and think. If you were to approach the interview preparation process by thinking like, okay, Maria, I don't even know how many questions, like, let's say it's 8 questions. I didn't even count. I did not count how many questions are down here. Let's say it's like 8 or 10 questions. If you say, okay, I've got to memorize answers for these 10 different questions, you're going to drive yourself crazy. But if you think about, like, here's a story about a project where I demonstrated all of these different traits, then you can be more nimble and answer the questions on the fly, regardless of which variation of the question you get. Side note again for ApplicantLab users, once you've brainstormed your stories, if you have skipped the branding module, which I know some people do, I get it. Everyone's in a hurry. Go back to the branding module if you have a chance, because in branding, what happens is that all of your stories are here on the side. And then what you do is you start to really take a step back and think about, like, wow, what did I show empathy in that situation? I didn't really show empathy, but what did I really took a risk, or, I was really a good team player there, or I really had to be determined. That was a story where I had to be so tenacious and I had to not give up. And so basically you start to allocate your brand traits to all of your different stories. So then that way, when you get to the interview prep module, and you're like, oh gosh, when was there a time that I was innovative, or when was I a risk taker, or who do I have a global mindset? Whatever it is, you pick the traits that you want to highlight up here in the upper right hand corner. And then any stories that contain one or more of these traits will show up with one or more of those colors. And then that way you can allocate as you start to prepare, like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? What is your greatest accomplishment? Tell us about a time you faced an ethical dilemma. You can start to select and prepare as part of your preparation process. You start to think like, okay, if I'm asked about my strengths and weaknesses, I'm going to talk about blah, 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 blah. I'm going to talk about these 2 examples. My leadership example is these 2 examples, right? So this color coding can be a useful tool. Not everyone uses it, but it can be useful for some people to help you see, like, which stories are the most promising ones. And then you drag and drop those stories to start to allocate them as sort of step 1 in your preparation process. So now let's cover the do's and don'ts of the main buckets. Ooh, I am just flying through this. This is great. Okay. So for a leadership type of bucket, if you are asked, this could be a question: a time you led a team, your greatest accomplishment, time you had to persuade someone, whatever it is. First of all, I want you to set the stage quickly, because one of the things that I think a lot of folks may not realize going into this process is that the interviewers themselves, especially if they're experienced, they have situation buckets of their own in their head. And this applies to essays as well. If you start telling a story, I will pattern match as an admissions person. So I will say, oh, I know where this is going. It's a person wasn't pulling their weight story, or I know where this is going. It's a miscommunication between 2 different departments story, or it's a demanding boss story, right? So just like how there are buckets for your experiences, there are also buckets for the scenarios involved. So the good news is you don't have to spend a lot of time describing, like, well, it was the salespeople and it was the engineers. And the salespeople, they only care about hitting their numbers. But the engineer, like, you don't have to spend all this time giving that part of the backstory, because I'm like, oh, yep, interdepartmental conflict, been there, done that. So that's good for you because it means you don't have to spend a lot of time going into all the backstory. And then she said this and he hates her. Just get to the key problem as soon as possible. And you could even say, like, my greatest accomplishment was when I was able to launch this product, but the reason I'm proud of this was because I got the salespeople and the engineering folks to work together, whereas traditionally they had had a very contentious relationship. And then tell me what the key problem was. This is another one that I see sometimes where someone is like, they start telling, like, we were hired by this company to do blah, blah, blah. And they wanted us to do, and they start going into all of this detail about the project. And then they're like, oh, and by the way, like one of the things that made it complicated was that sales and engineering, woo, they were at each other's throats. They did not get along. And by that point, like I am not paying attention, right? Like I'm human and I'm thinking, what am I going to make for dinner tonight? Oh God, do I have to go to the grocery store? Right. So just get to that problem as soon as you can. What was the core problem that you were addressing, or problems if it's a multifaceted story? Then when you are describing your actions, I'm jumping down to this one down here, what did you do, not we? When you're talking about your actions, focus on those EQ aspects, not the technical aspects. So if part of this solution, this accomplishment was I had to build a website that utilized a machine learning optimization algorithm, blah, 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 I don't care, right? Because that's not the job I'm hiring you for. I want you to make me proud as an alumnus 20 years from now, or an alumna 20 years from now. And your ability to build a website right now that's not what's going to make you the next head of GE, the next head of Facebook, whatever company, right? It's the EQ aspects. So what I mean by that is, instead of saying, I built this complicated machine learning algorithm using the such and such framework and the open source, whatever, I don't care about that. But what I do care about was, I had this idea to use this new sort of open source framework thing. And when I pitched it to the client, they were like, no way. That's interesting, because overcoming an obstacle where someone says to you, no way, that's going to be, I don't mean to be a bummer. I don't mean to be a downer here, but that's going to be with you for the rest of your career. Whether the no way is coming from your CEO or from a client or from a business partner or from someone on your team or someone that works for you, and you're like, can you please work this weekend? And they're like, no way. So what's useful about the EQ thing is that, since those EQ issues are things you will deal with the rest of your career, even as a senior person, that's what I want you to focus on, especially any insights that you had. So you might say something like, I asked Ashley if she could please work on Saturday to get the big presentation done. And she said, no way. And so then I realized, right, something like that. Like I realized, I thought about it and I realized that she's a big soccer fan and there was a big English Premier League game happening on Saturday. And I remembered, like, oh, that's right, she's going to watch it. So then I thought, okay, hey, Ashley, what if instead you work on it on Sunday afternoon? It doesn't have to be Saturday. I just mentioned Saturday because that's the day that works best for me this weekend. But now that I think about it, I realize that Saturday mornings matter a lot to you. So, right, what was that insight? So not just saying, yeah, you can say, so one way I got her to do what I wanted was I changed the day in which she had to do it, which I asked her to do it. But what makes that answer even better is if you tell me what was the insight, you know, I gave that presentation to the head of marketing, and when I put up the slide with all of the financial projections, his eyes glazed over. And that's when I realized I need to connect with him emotionally. In order to get him to pay attention to the numbers, I can't start with the numbers. I need to start with emotion. So I switched around the order of the presentation, and the next time I gave it, blah, blah. So what are those realizations that you had that convinced me that you are good at developing insight into human behavior? Because that's what leaders need. And then similarly, so let me peek inside your head. What were you thinking? What did you say? What did you do? Did you consider different I thought about saying, you know what, Ashley, you work for me and you're just going to do it. You should not say that ever. I'm exaggerating. But I thought, maybe I should do this or maybe I should do that. Like, help me really get inside your head. Because again, at the leadership thing, it's not two different people might have the same exact accomplishment on their resume, right? I launched a new product that made $1 million. I launched a new product that made $1 million. But maybe one person did it by screaming at everyone and making them feel terrible. And maybe the other person did it by being like, rah, 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 let's go team. And the problem is that the reason the admissions office cares about who did it which way is that if this person goes out into the workforce and let's say they go work for, I don't know, Apple or Amazon, and they go and they start screaming at everyone, their career may not go very well. And that means that they're not going to elevate in the world. And that means that they will not make the school proud 20 years from now. So that is why it's so important to talk about what were those EQ things. That matters a lot more than the algorithm or the, the database had 4 zillion terabytes of data that had to be parsed using a SQL. Like that stuff doesn't matter. So for a leadership question or anything where you were sort of, helping things happen, do not present yourself as the person who saved the day, right? You're not Superman swooping in and, by yourself, you defeat the monster or whatever. Even if that's what actually happened, it makes you not look very friendly or very nice. And I see sometimes people, again, because you think like, oh, it's such a high stakes conversation. This is, I'm going to present myself as, the team was falling apart. What a bunch of bozos. Thankfully, I came in and I was like, look, guys, don't worry. I'm here now. Right. And so I set everyone straight. The project was a mess and I came in and I saved the day because I am great. Like, that's disgusting. That's so gross, even if that's what really happened. So at least talk a little bit about like, even that, let's say that's what really happened. Let's say the team was a mess because they were all incompetent clowns and they were like sort of running around and bumping into each other. And you're like, what a mess. And you came in, you're like, okay, guys, we're going to put together a project plan. And the project plan will have you clown number 1 do this and you clown number 2 do this. And they were like, yay, hooray. At least then show empathy for, it makes sense. They had not had, the previous manager had quit. And so they hadn't had a manager for a few months. And so it made sense that they were, I understand, right? They weren't entirely sure what management wanted. There was nobody communicating to them what the priorities should be. And so once I realized that what they needed, that they had great intentions, they had great work ethic, they just didn't really know where to focus that work ethic. That's when I decided to come up with a project plan. Right? So that's how you talk about what's the insight? The insight was what? They need guidance. They need direction. Good people. Most people are good people, or at least they try to be good people. So give them the benefit of the doubt and tell me what was that EQ insight. If you do that, even if the question is talk about a difficult person, talk about a difficult client, talk about a time that your team did not meet expectations, whatever it is, talk about a time you led a team. That's what I want you to focus on. It's going to make your answer stronger. The empathy bucket. Okay, so it's not enough to say, I see this sometimes when I read essays. People are like, this person was not performing, right? Someone on my team was they just were not showing up. They weren't doing what they had to do. So then I demonstrated empathy and I got them to start working. Again, you can't just say, I'm very empathetic. You can't say that. You can't say that about anything. You can't just say like, what's my leadership style? I'm a great collaborative leader and then just leave it at that. Or I'm very empathetic. Do you know what? I'm so nice. Like, no, you have to give examples for anything. Any assertion you make about yourself you have to have an example to back it up. Because if I look you in the eye right now and I say, you know what I am fluent in German. I'm actually not fluent in German. So, but how do I know? Like, unless you start speaking German, like, so when somebody says in an interview or in an essay or whatever, like, because I'm such an empathetic leader, I decided that I was able to save the day. Like, you need to tell me what it was about that situation. You need to prove to me that you were empathetic. You can't just say you were empathetic. You need to actually explain what about your thought process makes you empathetic. You have to prove that you were, right? So, what are some ways you can do this? First of all, if your empathy story is coming through, say, tell us about a time a team member wasn't pulling their own weight. Or tell us about a time you had to work with a difficult person who was, sticking stubbornly to their ideas and was not helping others. Whatever it is, first of all, never throw the other person under the bus. Please don't ever say anything like, well, you know how salespeople are, or oh, these people, these people in the industry, our clients, they're so, oh my God, they're just not very smart, right? Like, whatever, like, don't ever, even if it's true, I believe you can tell me that, just the two of us secretly. I get it. I've worked with people who are stupid, and I've worked with people who are bad people, and I've worked with people who are lazy. I get, but you can't say it in her interview. You can't be like, yeah, this woman on my team was super lazy. So I had to try to get her back on board. Like, instead, describe the action. Don't describe the person. Don't say she was lazy. He was a backstabber. Describe the action, right? We had a thing due and she did not submit her piece of the project on time. So when you're talking about the negative aspects of another person, describe their actions. Don't assign them a negative, that they are bad people. Then you're going to prove to me that you're empathetic by demonstrating empathy for why they might have done that action. It was understandable that she didn't submit her piece of the project on time because I found out that her pet rodent had died. And I knew how much that rodent meant to her. I don't know why I just came up with the word. Why didn't I just come up with a specific? Her hamster had died. And I knew how much that hamster meant to her. And so it was understandable that maybe she was sort of overcome by grief. Or, you know, when I told this person this idea and he screamed me out of the room, he did not accept my idea at all. Like, the real reason might be that he's not very bright. But you can't say that. You have to say something like, "Oh, I thought about it and I realized that I could see why he might think that I was trying to step on his toes." Or I realized why I could see that, what? This argument that I'm making is not what matters to him is hitting his numbers and getting that year-end bonus. It's not efficiency. So if I want to get him to adopt these efficient processes, I need to figure out a way to convince him that this efficiency is going to help him get that bonus. So it's understandable that he didn't care at all about my ideas about efficiency, right? Not because he's stupid, even if he was, but because of, what was that motivation? If the question that you are asked is one of diversity and inclusion, right? When have you done an inclusive environment? When have you fostered an inclusive environment? So first of all, if you are someone who is from an underrepresented group, if you were the person who was being excluded in an inclusion story, then I'm sorry that happened to you. But the good news is it makes your job a lot easier if you get asked a question like this, because then you just talk about your how you very kindly reached out to others and how you did not give up, right? So when I went to work for Goldman Sachs, I was the only person in my group whose parents had not gone to college. Everyone else, their parents were doctors and lawyers and physicists or whatever. My parents did not go to college, and so it was clear within like week, like they would all be talking about going to, whatever, Martha's Vineyard for the weekend. And I'm like, yeah, my parents pick grapes at a vineyard. Like, it's very different. So then that inclusion is about you trying to not give up in the face of being excluded. So that's actually the silver lining of that terrible thing happening to you, is that now you have got a pretty good answer for this. But most people are not the part of the excluded people. They're the people doing the exclusion or realizing that exclusion is happening. So how do you demonstrate empathy, right? Let's say that you were the person at Goldman Sachs who realized, like, oh, this person just joined our team, and when we joke about whatever, the Hamptons, they don't know what we're talking about because their parent, whatever. Like, oh, I realized, like, I noticed that she was sort of hanging back, or I noticed that she felt uncomfortable. And so I thought about it. Like, I thought about, if you come from a position of privilege, you can say, like, I realized, wow, I'm so lucky. Like, of course, I know what the Hamptons are because my parents are both, MDs at JP Morgan. And so, of course, like, but it must be really awkward. I put myself in her shoes and I realized, like, wow, it must be really hard to be the only person in this group who is whatever. Or I put myself in the, let's take another type of inclusion story. Another common one could be something like, let's say you work for a company that only hires people from a certain, like, 5 top colleges, and you want to convince them to try to, your inclusion story was, I convinced them to open it up and do like an open recruiting instead of just focusing, right? So I put myself in the shoes, like, I was lucky, I got to go to IIT. And so I knew that I had this opportunity, but I thought, wow, what if I hadn't? I put myself in the shoes of someone who hadn't, and I thought, wow, are we missing out on a lot of talent? How would I feel if I had been whatever? How would I feel if I were being judged just based on simply on the color of my skin? How would I feel if my gender alone made people not respect me? Right. So again, it's not just saying like, well, I empathized with what it was like to be a woman in a corporate environment. And so I decided to help her. Like, not good enough, right? Really, that answer is gonna be so much stronger if you put me in your head. And with an empathy question, it's about you telling me how you put yourself in someone else's head. Uh, Moving on, another way that the empathy bucket can answer a common question that you can get is the ethical dilemma question. Have you ever faced an ethical dilemma? So in that case, again, maybe the person who asked you to do the thing was really a fundamentally evil person. I once worked for someone who was like this. He wanted like the company to spend hundreds of millions of dollars just because he wanted to live in Dubai. We were starting the Tata, what is now known as the Tata Sky company, and the guy who was going to be running it did not want to live in India. He wanted to live in Dubai, and so he was like, "Okay, Maria, like you need to make the argument that the uplink center, like the satellite, thing that takes the TV signals and sends it up, like that needs to be in Dubai." And I'm like, "But it shouldn't be in Dubai. It should be in India because it's an Indian service with Indian TV for Indian customers." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, but I don't want to live in India." So he's like, "I need you to." So anyway, this guy was actually like a bad guy. I'm not interviewing right now, so I can tell you this. He's just really a fundamentally bad person. But if I were asked in an interview, tell us about an ethical dilemma, I would say, okay, well, my boss asked me to make the financial argument that we should do operations in a certain city in Dubai because that's where he wanted to live. Um, I can't throw him under the bus. I have to say, it was understandable because I mean, he had been living in Dubai prior to this. His family was there. And so I don't know if that was his only motivation. It was totally his only motivation, right? But I realized that like maybe that was influencing him, So I had a decision to make. Like, do I do what he tells me to do, or do I take another path? So with the ethical dilemma, empathize with a person, try to find some some redeeming reason that they ask you to do this dirty, filthy thing. Um, Tell me what did you think about doing? Like, "Oh, yeah, I thought about, doing this, but oof." And then if there was a risk involved, especially a political risk, not a technical risk, like, "Oh, I knew that if I migrated to the cloud server, the whole thing might collapse from the web architecture." Not that kind of a risk, but like a political risk, right? So, he said that he was gonna fire me if I didn't do this, but I couldn't sleep at night, right? Like, it was a terrible idea on every possible conceivable level, um, and so I couldn't do it. And so I thought I would rather not have a job than, blah, blah, blah. So, for the ethical dilemma, the empathy you show is with the person asking you to do the bad thing, and then you also explain what were the options you considered, and then the reason I ended up putting this, was there a risk, by that I mean a political risk involved. I put that in bold as I was reviewing this presentation because I thought that actually applies to any situation, right? So if we think back to one of the previous examples, I asked Ashley to work over the weekend to get the presentation done. The risk was that she had said that she was going to quit if I asked her to work another weekend. And yet here I was, I couldn't help it. I had to do it. The investors wanted the presentation 8 a.m. Monday morning. The risk was she might walk, and if that happened, I would be screwed because Ashley, like, runs everything in my company, right? Or whatever it is, right? So that kind of explanation, if there was a risk, because as an interviewer listening to you, I wasn't there. I don't live your life, right? So how am I gonna know necessarily if there was a risk? I'm not saying make up a risk, please. This is where sometimes my job gets a little frustrating for me. Someone's like, "Oh, well, is she saying that I should pretend that it was risky?" No, because it's going to be clear. Remember the little ventriloquist dummy doll? If you're sort of exaggerating it to a seasoned interviewer, it's like, really? You were going to get fired because you decided to correct someone's typo on a memo? Really? They're going to fire you over that? And then it's like, oh well, okay, maybe they weren't going to fire me, but and then you look terrible. Um, so do not patronize other people in an empathy thing. Don't be like, oh, I felt so bad for him because, he's an alcoholic because he has no willpower. Like, whoa, yikes. Don't put other people down. And no humble brags. This is one that drives me nuts. Sometimes people, and thankfully people are getting savvier about this, so they're not as likely to let their true colors fly. But sometimes people will say things like, "Yeah, I had to empathize with him. He just wasn't used to working with someone as smart as I am." Right? Like, don't use the empathizing with the other person as an excuse to try to squeeze in a compliment that you give yourself, right? It was understandable that she would feel threatened by my superior intelligence, even if that was true. Don't It's obvious if someone tries to do it. Don't be like, "I'm so clever." Like, no. Okay, another main bucket, the maturity bucket. So what do you do here? You need to reflect on your weaknesses and own up to them. Admit that you have them. Admit when you need other people to help you. Admit, look, I'm not very good at being, at detail orientation. I need someone in my life like, in my case in real life, Karin. I need someone like a Karin to do because I am not good at this other stuff. Actually stop and ask yourself, what are my weaknesses? So one exercise to do this, one thought exercise is like, if you could change something about yourself, what would it be? In terms of work, not like, I wish I were, you know, a 6 foot tall model rugby, professional cricket player. Like, I don't mean it that way, but I mean like at work, if you could change one thing, like, oh man, I wish I were someone who was more like blank. That's a good way to start to think about like, oh, what are my weaknesses? Because whatever it is that you lack, that's probably a weakness you have right now. And be honest about this, right? Don't I can't stand it when someone's like, "Oh, yeah, a failure? Who? A time that I failed was I sent an email to someone and there was a typo. There was a typo in the third sentence." Like, that's not because I didn't proofread it. So first of all, not proofreading is a mistake, but it's not a weakness. So don't make the mistake of trying to answer a weakness question with just a surface level shallow mistake. You have to talk about what it was about you that led to the mistake. So not just like, well, I didn't proofread, but like, I didn't proofread because I'm not very good at managing multiple projects at once. Um, it has to be a real weakness, right? It can't just be my handwriting is terrible. Like, that's not a real weakness. Like, doesn't really impact your life or your team in any real way. Um, and if you are asked specifically about a failure, it has to be a real failure, right? A typo in an email to a client, it might be embarrassing, uh, but it's probably not that big of a deal. So don't try to make something sound like a big deal if it wasn't a big deal, because I can tell, and that's just irritating, right? They ask the failure questions or the weakness questions for a reason. They want to see, like, do you actually acknowledge what your weaknesses are? And then that's the first step. And then what are you doing to make those weaknesses better? What are you doing to address those weaknesses? Because you can't improve it if you don't acknowledge it exists. So if you tell yourself that you're perfect, why are you're not gonna try to improve something because you're like, well, I don't need to improve anything. Everything I do is great. Um, and that's not going to be, why do business schools even care about that? Well, because when those people eventually, even the most quote unquote perfect person as a 26-year-old is going to go out into the world and eventually they're going to face something that they don't know how to do. And if they're working at an employer or if they are an entrepreneur or whatever, and they're like, whatever, I don't have any weaknesses, the world is going to smack them around enough where eventually it's like, oh, I actually do have weaknesses. And again, I don't want to be embarrassed. I, as a school, don't want to send someone to go work at a place like Microsoft. And then that person is like, they get their first annual review and it's like, well, no, I disagree with you, boss. I don't have those weaknesses I don't have any weaknesses. Because then when the recruiter comes to visit my campus again, and if they're chatting with me, they're like, oh, yeah, we love, man, all the 10 people we hired last year were great. I mean, whew, that one guy, though, a little full of himself, isn't he? Right. So it's important for a number of reasons that you actually, and even if you're not even applying to business school, think about your weaknesses because that's how you start to address them in real life. This is life advice here, not just interview advice. Okay. So make it a real weakness. Not a humble brag weakness. Not a I'm so smart that I am so smart I intimidate other people. I know, it's a curse, right? No. It has to be a real something real. It has to be a real failure. And moving on, tell me what you learned. Because a failure or identifying a weakness in which you then do nothing is a wasted opportunity. The whole point of failure being a gift is that it teaches you. So that way you either don't make the same mistake again, or if you make it, you make it not, it's not as bad of a mistake. So if you are asked about what's something you're not good at, what's something you wish you could improve in yourself, tell me about a time you dropped a ball, tell me about a time you disappointed others, whatever it is, tell me the story and then tell me what you learned. Based on this, I learned that I really need to do blank. I need to be a better listener. I need to do whatever it is that you learned. And then ideally, those of you who are lab users who use the essay portion of the lab, you're going to be familiar with my ideas of primary evidence and supporting evidence. Ideally, you will have supporting evidence afterwards that proves to me that you learned it. So you don't just say, based on that, I learned that I need to listen more to my clients. But I learned that I need to listen more to my clients. And therefore, at my next project, um, I then made sure to ask at the end of the meeting, hey guys, is this what you meant? Right? Did I understand correctly? Jessica, when you said this, that did that what you meant? So that way you're proving, you're not just saying that you learned it, you're proving that you learned it by telling me a story about you learning it that shows that you learned it. So if you're asked, tell me about a time you failed. This is another place where sometimes people want to retreat to the we. Well, we had this big deadline and we missed it, and it was really bad. Okay, but within that we, what did you do? Did I got too distracted with a detail and I spent 3 days working on this one detail and I completely lost track of time, and because of that, I made the rest of the team late. What was it that you did? Retreating to the we is not gonna help here. Um, and then also, by the way, I don't want you to, again, because if you try to wiggle your way out of the weakness, it's such a distasteful, it's just so gross. But if you had good intentions, but just poor execution, you can mention those too, right? Like, I got distracted on this one little piece of the problem. I ended up spending 3 days on it. I know I shouldn't have done it. It was just so interesting to me. And I think a part of me thought, if I can solve this one little piece, maybe we can take this solution that I build and use it for other clients. And so I think that's why I got so distracted. But, whew, man, I should have been better at managing myself. Right? So at least that way, it's not just like I focused on this thing for 3 days because I'm a flake, which might be true, but at least, like, you're just sort of, like, explaining a little bit of rationale. But don't wiggle out of it. Don't be like, "Well, it wasn't my fault," because my idea was really that thing I spent 3 days on was super cool, and management is dumb for not, because they don't appreciate how brilliant I am. Like, "Yeah." Um, and okay, so if you're asked, "What are your strengths and weaknesses?" This will not surprise you, hopefully, by this point in the 46 minutes that I've been talking, this will not surprise you. Please give concrete examples, right? It's very common to be asked, "What are your strengths and weaknesses?" in an MBA interview. For the strengths, similar to what I've been talking about for like leadership and stuff, don't be like, well, one of my strengths is that I'm awesome and everything I do is right. Like, give me hopefully EQ strengths, not I'm very good at building code or I'm very good at building cars or whatever it is. Um, and for weaknesses, give concrete examples. Make them real weaknesses and give concrete examples. Sometimes I lose focus and I don't allocate my time well. For example, recently, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes in the past, I've made the mistake of thinking that I assume that I know what my client is saying, and I've been wrong. For example, blah, 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 blah. And in order to correct it, here's what I've done. So try to tell me what you've learned. And if it is a weakness specifically, also tell me what you're doing to try to address that weakness. Right? Don't just be like, whatever, man, this is who I am. Take it or leave it. This is the package. You just need to handle it. Like, you need to actually say something like, and based on that, I realized, and that's why I now at the end of every meeting with a client, I try to do a recap or whatever it is. Because that's going to show not just that you have the maturity that is necessary to function in the grown-up world, but also that you have the growth mindset. right? That you're like, wow, I really blew it, but okay, I'm going to try to learn from this and I'm going to try to recover and I'm going to try to move forward. Um, so don't give fake weaknesses. And then, but on the other side of things, I know I've been talking a lot about the arrogant, my only weakness is that my smile is so dazzling that clients pass out when they see me. Like, no, but also there's people who are I'm focusing so much on that because that's the one I tend to see more often. But also the other end of the spectrum isn't good either. Like, what's my weakness? Well, what isn't my weakness? I mean, everything I touch turns to lead. I'm a mess. I'm disorganized. I completely forgot I had to do this webinar this morning until Abhijit sent me an email about it yesterday. And oh my God, like I am just the worst. I'm terrible. Like, it's okay. Just don't go that far. Okay, so now we're gonna switch a little bit. The another main bucket that I touched upon before, because basically the interview is going to be broken out into kind of like the why do you want an MBA? Why do you want to come to our school? What are your career plans? And then all the rest of them are behavioral questions. So the ones that I was just talking about were the behavioral questions. And I grouped them together because the way how I was building the presentation, it kind of flowed more nicely I thought to talk to. But in the actual interview, many interviews will often, always, so don't get thrown for a loop. This is where memorizing things is bad. But often an interview will start with walk me through your resume or tell me about yourself. And then that question is usually followed by what are your career goals? And then why do you want to get an MBA? So a couple of things. First of all, in terms of the memorization thing, I once had someone email me after their interview and they were like completely freaked out because they're like, I was expecting the first question to be walk me through your resume. And she didn't ask that until 20 minutes in. Or like, I was expecting to be what's your career? Why do you want to come to our school? And they didn't ask that. It was a second to last question. And I was completely, this is why you don't want to, you want to be nimble, right? You want to be ready like a little boxer, but kind of bouncing around and not planting your feet in the ground. Because if you plant your feet in the ground and they go in any slightly different direction, you're going to be like, what? And it's going to be bad. Okay. So my future and why this why this makes sense given my past. You can tell what are your weaknesses, Maria? Well, detail orientation. When I'm building the webinar the morning of it and I miss this kind of typo. Okay, fine. It's okay though, guys. I have other strengths. Don't worry. Okay, so the sort of walk me through your resume. This is actually multiple questions usually. It often starts with walk me through your resume and then goes into what do you want to do in your career and then why do you want an MBA and then why do you want an MBA from our school. Now, I don't want you to prepare answers to each of these questions in a vacuum because sometimes the questions might be lumped together. Like, hey, so thanks for coming to your interview. I'm interviewing you right now for Booth. What is it about Booth that appeals to you? That's a way to ask that same question. I'm just asking it with different words, but it's the same thing. What about Booth appeals to you? Well, what about Booth appeals to me is it offers the things I need to get to the career path I want to go. And the reason I want that career path is because in the past, here's what I've done that's relevant. So I want you to have these ingredients, the ingredients of, and don't worry, I've got words here. The ingredients are, where have you been in the past? Based on where you've been in the past, why do you then want to achieve this future? And then why is the MBA the thing in the middle that makes sense? Why is that short-term career the thing that, that post-MBA goal, if you're asked explicitly about that, why does that make sense given where you want to go? So if you're here now, you want to go here. So step one, what is it about this long-term future that makes sense given where you've been in the past? If you spent your entire career so far as an engineer for an automotive company, and I say, well, where do you want to go long-term? And you say, well, I want to write a hedge fund that invests in, I don't know, mining, extraction, and minerals. It's like, whoa, wait, how does this lead to this? So here's where I've been. Because of where I've been, here's where I want to go, like way in the future. And then here are the gaps in the middle. And your MBA program, not just any MBA program, your MBA program is the gap, is what's going to fill in a big part of that gap. So when you're thinking about walk me through your resume, you obviously can't, you could probably spend 4 hours if you start with like, I was born in Towson, Maryland, in a small suburb of Baltimore. Like, no, you need to think about like what's most relevant for my future. So do you have a story of like how did an interest develop? And then also for each of the stories that you tell when you're walking me through your resume, focus on something that you learned that was valuable. So let's start with college. Normally walk me through your resume, you're going to start with college. Unless you had something like, oh, when I was in high school, I was an Olympic figure skater or something, then that's cool. But usually you're going to start with college. And when you talk about your college, I don't want you to talk about every class you took. I don't want you to talk about every project you worked on or every single club you were in. Only highlight the things that were most relevant to your career. And if what you did in college was not at all relevant to your career, then you're not going to spend a lot of time on the college part of walk me through your resume. Right? So if you went to college and you were a civil engineering major and now you work in banking, don't spend a lot of time being like, and then I worked on a project that was looking at the tensile strength of different variations of concrete mixed with steel rebar or whatever. Like, why would you go into that? It's got nothing to do with anything over here. So don't go into that. Don't tell me a story that doesn't make any. So when you're trying to pick what you're going to talk about, if you were a civil engineering major and you did a project on the tensile strengths of different types of concrete, if your career goal is to work in a hedge fund, that doesn't make sense. But if your career goal is to one day start a company that builds low-income housing and is using new materials that are going to be stronger and cheaper, excuse me, to make housing more affordable, now that project does make sense. So two people can have the same exact college experience, but what they talk about in Walk Me Through Your Resume is going to be different based on where they want to go in the future, what that career goal is. So if you did a project on solar panels and in the long term you want to work in the renewable energy industry, tell me about the solar panel thing. If you did a project on solar panels and as soon as you graduated, you went to work for Accenture Consulting and you have never even seen a solar panel since then, don't tell me about the solar panels project. Right? You've been working for ZS Associates and all of your clients are pharmaceuticals and that's where you want to continue to go in the future. Don't tell me about the solar panels project because I don't care because it's not relevant. So, talking about projects, pick the ones that are relevant. Talking about extracurriculars, focus on the extracurriculars where you had some sort of a leadership role and what you learned from that leadership role. So if you were I was just a member of the such and such club, who cares? But if you say, well, I was the career leader of the engineering club, and as part of that, I brought a career fair to campus that hired, I was able to get 30 of my classmates hired. And what was great about that, I mean, that's cool by itself, but it's so much better if you then add, and what I learned about that, it was great because it really helped teach me poise in front of corporate clients, right? I had to convince these corporations to come to my job fair. And so that was my first taste of what it's like to try to convince someone in a business setting. And that's a skill that's been very useful to me now in management consulting. Or that's a skill that, I'm that way later on when you talk about your career goal of maybe if you want to switch into management consulting, you can say like, I've already started to get me even in college, right? When I was doing that career fair, I had to convince these companies to come to campus. And so I've gotten a little taste of what it can be like to try to convince corporations to do things, right? So think you need to start with the end, right? When you're thinking about what you're going to say for walk me through your resume, what's the end? What's your end goal? Work backwards from there and then select the things that are relevant to this. Then after college, you took a job, probably, or maybe more than one job. Tell me why. Why did you take a job? And again, what did you learn? You can't say, I took this job because it paid really well, or I took this job because it was really prestigious. And my mom was like, you better take this job. If you don't take this job, you'll never get married, right? Obviously, you can't say anything like that. Make it about a challenge or what you were hoping to learn, right? I took this job in the pharmaceutical industry because I'm really fascinated by advances in health technology and help making people be healthier. And I know I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but I thought, I know I can use my analytical abilities to help more people get access to medicine or something like that. And then again, when you're there, don't talk about so my job, I had to analyze bucketfuls of data, and my job was to create the terabyte database that maximized the optimization of the supply curve projection. Now, tell me, what are the key important things that you're going to take with you, right? Not this job was great because it taught me how to debug PHP, no. But if you say, well, this job was really interesting because it was my first time leading teams and I learned that, when people really disagree, here's what you need to do. Or this job taught me, it was an introduction to how complex the US healthcare system is. And it really got me interested in healthcare. And by the way, this is fine also for things that you don't want. If you're like, I worked in healthcare, but I hated it. And maybe you can say, like, you know what? It was really interesting. I learned how to lead a team. I also learned that healthcare just wasn't for me. It's an industry that moves a little too slowly. It's a little too heavily regulated. And I thought I can make a bigger impact if instead I go work for a meditation app or so. Like I can impact people's health better, not through the healthcare system, but through a more of a B2C type of play. That's why I then went to join this other company that does that, whatever it is. And even if you kind of have to fudge it a little and kind of like invent a like that's fine. They won't know. And so the reason we're thinking we're going to start with the end in mind and think backwards is that then when you get to your career goals, it's all going to flow together so nicely. It's almost going to be the ideal goal is for it to almost be inevitable. Like if I were to say to an interviewer, okay, here's this person's walk me through your resume answer. What do you think their career goals are? Well, the career goal are, let's see, they worked at a pharmaceutical company. They were consulting to pharmaceutical companies, and now they work for a meditation app to help mental health. So I think their career goal is going to be to one day start their own mental health software company, maybe something in some cool emerging thing like VR or AR or something, right? Like if it flows together nicely, it's going to be great because then it's going to be really logical. And because you were smart and in your walk me through your resume answer, you only highlighted the relevant things. Now, when I say, well, what's my I've seen the power of technology in helping people address their mental health issues. And I've also started seeing VR. Really interesting things are happening in VR. And so my dream right now is to start a company that is going to provide mental health solutions through VR platforms, right? It's an immersive platform. I really think it can help people work through some of their issues and some of their problems, right? So that way it's logical. And then when you talk about your career goals, I want you to start with whatever that long-term problem is you want to solve, right? Like I just did, and then I could maybe add in something like, it's really a shame because mental health is so vital. It's so important. So many people struggle with it, and yet it's really inaccessible. It's expensive. It's hard to set up it's hard to set up appointments with people, whatever. And the reason I want you to start with the long-term problem. I want you to start with the long-term problem, even if the question you are asked is, hey, it's nice to meet you. Walk me through your resume. Okay, cool. So what job do you want to have after business school? I don't want you to then jump into the short-term job. I want you to tell me what this long-term destination is and then circle back into and so that's why when I graduate from Booth, I want to work for whatever. Because that way you're giving me a destination that you want to get to. And that's why the steps leading to the destination make sense. Now, if you're just asked more openly, what are your career goals and why do you want an MBA? Here's the way to structure it. So we start with a long-term problem. And look, I'm off to a good start, right? I've already learned a little bit about healthcare and how healthcare consumers do things. I've worked on this app that I think is really helping people, but I still need to learn more, right? And so ideally, and then here, these different ingredients, by the way, the short-term career goal or the YMBA, like these can all be interchanged. They don't have to follow the script. I want you to have these prepared, ready to go, almost like kind of together, but not memorized in a certain order, right? Because the question might be asked in a different order, and I don't want you to be stuck. So it's a matter of just knowing how the story flows. So you could say like, I'm off to a good start. I need to learn more. So I think before I launch my own company one day, first what I'll need to do is I need to get more experience in the VR space. So after business school, I want to work for a VR company. And in order to do that, I need the MBA. Or maybe you jump right to the MBA reasons and then you go to the short-term goal. It all depends on sort of the flow of the conversation. But you definitely need the short-term career goal as part of one of the ingredients. So then when you talk about the MBA, sometimes people will see on these like preparation websites, like, oh, you might be asked, why do you want an MBA? And then why do you want an MBA from our school? And so I don't want you to assume that you're going to get those two separate questions. If you are asked a generic question, why do you want an MBA? I want you to give a specific answer specific to that school. Because first of all, you don't even know. Like there have been times that I'm like, why do you want an MBA? And the person gives me a really generic answer. And I'm like, oh, this is stupid. Let me get through my other questions. I've got a list of, interviewers are usually given like lists of questions they have to get through in the time. And I'm like, come on, I move. And then afterwards, when I was doing the debrief, the person was like, yeah, I was totally like, why didn't you ask me why our school? And I'm like, I did. I just asked you why you wanted an MBA. Like, you can't just say like, but you're supposed to, but interviewer, you were supposed to give me two different questions. And so I was ready to go with Always answer, if you're asked why MBA generically, I want you to answer it with why this MBA specifically. So I need the MBA to learn about strategy, product strategy, and Kellogg's offerings in whatever are really exciting to me, in particular the class with Professor so-and-so. So when you talk about the why MBA, pick your major or concentration. I'm excited. I'm so excited that I can double major at Cornell. Super excited about it. My 2 majors are going to be this. And then here are the specific courses I'm going to take. And then when you talk about the courses, don't just throw out a bunch of courses. Don't be like, here are the 17 classes I'm going to take. In semester 1, I'm going to take, just pick 1 or 2, maybe 3. And then also tell me why it matters, right? Like if it's not already obvious, you know, one thing I learned is that it's really when I was working at ZS and I was trying to help, these companies get patients to take their diabetes medicine, I learned that it's really hard to convince people to stick to a schedule. And so that's why there's a class that you guys offer on consumer behavior that I think is going to be really valuable for me because I'm going to need to understand consumer psychology in order to get them to use my mental health app. Right. So come up with like a specific reason why, like a hypothetical, if here's where you're going to be in the future and this MBA is filling in the gaps, tell me specifically which offering fills in which specific gap, like why this offering. And then you're going to want to talk about a club as well, right? I'm going to join the healthcare club. I'm going to join the entrepreneurship club. I'm going to join the consulting club. And then also try to mention something you can contribute to that club and or some other club. So if you're new to consulting and you're joining the consulting club, you might not be able to really contribute a whole lot to the consulting club if we're just being honest. But maybe you can say, and outside of that, I can't wait to join the Latino Students Organization. Last year I organized a big salsa party, and I would love to do that again. So try to don't just be a taker when you're talking about why you want to go to a school, and you start to talk about I'm going to take this class and I'm going to join this club, and this club is going to help me prepare for consulting interviews or whatever. Always remember to put back in something that you can contribute, ideally through an extracurricular, ideally based on something you've done in the past. Right? It's like again, if I used to say, "Oh, and I can't wait to speak German." It's like, "Well, I don't speak German." Like, I can't wait to put together a salsa party. Well, have you ever done that before? Well, no, but it sounded good, so I just decided to wing it. Hmm. And then also when you were talking about why the school, if you have spoken to some students, which I hope you have, you might want to throw in one of their names, but like, oh, and I can't, especially Professor Moon's class. Like, I'm really excited for it. I talked to Larry Wasserman, and he said that this class was good, right? He's a second year student, or I talked to an alumnus, or I spoke to someone in the consulting club who said blah blah blah. And then also you can bring up the culture of the school. I think sometimes this feels a little forced. If you're like, and I'm also really interested in, Tuck because of its supportive, caring community. Only say something like this if you have a concrete example from someone you've spoken with, right? Like my former coworker went to Tuck and she said blah blah blah. But otherwise, if you just say, I'm really excited to go to I love how your school has a supportive culture, and if you just sort of say that by itself, I think it sounds a little weird and a little forced if you don't have any like concrete to back it up with. Oops, that was supposed to appear later. Okay. And as I said before, if you are asked generically why MBA, grab that opportunity and start telling me why this MBA, because you might not get a chance to later. All right. So those are my big overview. So instead of saying, well, here are 20 different questions you might get in your interview, so let's go through all 20 of them, what I'm trying to teach you is to be ready with stories that you can pivot and use those stories to answer different types of questions. If you are interested in more advice from me, again, ApplicantLab.com, the interview preparation only, it's $79. I will probably raise. I looked at that and I'm like, wait, I'm only charging this. I'm probably going to raise this price soon, but as of right now, it's $79. And what you get with that is you get access to some of the modules that I showed you before in this presentation, like the brainstorming module and the branding module. And then within the interview module, I have, let me see if we can show you. Oh, where was it? Whoop, bloop, 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 bloop. Okay, so here where it says like, it's got all these different questions and it says click for advice. So when you click on those, you're going to get usually like a quick written explanation if you're in a hurry, and a video of me walking you through, usually like, here's what you want to make sure to say, here's what you don't. So like a more in-depth version of what I just went through with these buckets, boop, 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 boop. I do a more specific version of that for most of the, pretty much all of the questions. So if you like the advice that I gave you now, uh, and you've got an interview coming up, you didn't use the lab for the rest of your application, no problem. But you can still benefit from the resources I have put together by signing up only for the interview portion. And so with that, I am done